All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the Generative AI Meetup Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Shashank, and I have Mark here with me with a beautiful background somewhere in the middle of Canada in the Yukon. I'm a software engineer on the Google Labs team working on a vibe design product called Stitch. And Mark is a former software engineer at Amazon, now working on a stealth idea. And I've been trying to convince him to vibe code and use a lot of these coding IDEs. So today I thought we would dive deep into how you can use some of these coding agents, some of these vibe coding tools to not just build a prototype, but ideate, design, build, and then also launch a startup. So with that, I would like you to go through a pet project that I had that I built over the course of maybe 2 weekends after talking about this idea with a few friends. So the inspiration for this came after I finished a 2-month AI coaching program teaching high school kids how to use AI, a little bit of the history, and some of the practical applications. And then at the end of this 8-week series, some of them built entire functioning apps that had AI features in them that were calling APIs that you could use that were deployed. And I was just blown away. So that kind of made me want to try some of these tools out myself. And honestly, I was really surprised. So what is vibe coding, Mark? What do you think when you hear that term?
So when I hear vibe coding, I sort of think about Andre Karpathy's original post when he coined the term vibe coding. So Andre Karpathy is one of the preeminent AI researchers who publishes a lot of videos. He has a strong Twitter presence. He worked at OpenAI for a while. He worked at Tesla. I think he may be back at OpenAI. Anyways, he is just one of the top AI researchers. And he made a Twitter post where he said, you know, sometimes when I'm programming, I don't even really like to think about exactly what I'm the code, and I just like to think about the result. So let's say I wanted to put a button on a screen, and I just asked the LLM to do it. And I think that vibe coding, in a general sense, is when you just have the AI do your programming for you, and you just let the code kind of melt away, and you just don't worry about the architecture too much. You don't worry too much about like the design. You just sort of just like let the LLM figure out all the details, just figure out, focus on the product.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate description. And you can see if you're a software engineer listening to this, where this approach might kind of fail. Works really well for prototypes, for tiny weekend projects, but it kind of starts to fall apart when the project size grows, the complexity grows, and when the domain that you're working on is a little more esoteric, and the LLM runs out of training data to solve the specific problem that you're trying to approach. But yeah, we kind of wanted to talk about building, prototyping a weekend project. So here, for our audio listeners, I'm sharing my screen of a project that I built and launched called Convo. It takes in your backup messages from WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, or SMS if you have like an Android phone. You can export all these things, upload it into this tool, upload some of your contacts, and then it will bring it all together and display it for you to browse through, explore it. And the fun new feature that I added is it gives you statistics, some basic data statistics about how many messages you send back and forth between your friend. So this is one of my close friends from college, John Alex Fritzel, said I sent him 11,000 messages in total over the course of about 4 years since I have these backups on my phone. And I added a couple AI insights tabs. So this one analyzes our conversation summary, gives me a brief overview of the conversation that I have with my friend, tells me about the main topics that we talk about. John is currently single, though we talk about dating, we talk about finance, relationships, career, technology, mental, physical health. It does some sentiment analysis and gives me a summary of the mood of this conversation, and then give me follow-up tips for how to continue this conversation and what new topics to talk about. And all of this was in one LLM call. What do you think about the results here with AI?
I mean, I haven't read the whole conversation, but I think the results look nice. I actually have a couple questions about this. Is there a limit to the amount of text messages you can put in? Or like do you just throw all the text into context and then you ask the AI to summarize it, or do you do any chunking?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I initially was truncating the last N messages that totaled to about 30,000 tokens. I did some rough heuristics based on character size, and I thought that would be the best approach because anecdotally people say that after about 30,000 tokens, the LLM can't make sense of all of the data. But I was like, you know what? Every week the LLMs are getting better and better. The token sizes, the context lengths are getting longer and longer. So I feel like this is limiting the ability of this app. And I just right now throw everything in order of most recent to least recent. So I just let the LLM truncate the messages itself. And it works pretty well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it seems good, right? I like the insights that you gave, and I think the statistics. I can't say it. The statistics are wild because I don't know if I've ever sent 11,000 messages to somebody. That is so much talking.
You'd be surprised. Maybe upload some of your messages here and see what it gives you. But another feature that I added was an AI chat where you can talk to an LLM about the conversation that you're having with someone. So to kind of clarify this question, I'm going to ask the AI, what is the oldest message you found in this chat history? And maybe that'll be when did this...
So for the audio listeners, we are looking at Shashank's app. And Shashank, what was the website?
It's called convochat.io. CONVOCHAT.io. And I can talk a little bit about the naming, but I kind of made a mistake because there's a different convochat.com, which is a very SEO optimized website that blasts a bunch of content and it's like taking over the search results. So that's something that you should all check beforehand. See if the name that you're picking has a dominant player out there already. And if they do, maybe like rethink your branding.
Okay, yeah. So if you follow the steps that Shashank's going to show you today, you should be, if you work hard enough, in maybe 2 weekends, you can have an MVP launched as well.
Absolutely. And honestly, you don't need to work that hard. The LLM does most of the heavy lifting for you, but you need to be able to supervise all of these different LLMs to make sure they're on the right track.
Yeah, so it helps if you know what you're doing. So anyways, Shashank has been programming for a long time. So if you're just getting started programming, it may take a little bit longer just to kind of learn these concepts. Because whenever you're doing vibe coding, it helps to at least be generally familiar with the concepts that are being used. You don't have to know every single line, but it's important to know like loosely how these things fit together and work. That's going to help you immensely when you're debugging broken code and whatnot.
Yeah. So let's get started. The first step before you start building is to have a clear idea of what you're trying to build. So this was an idea that I was brainstorming with a few friends. I had a rough idea in my head, and I needed to articulate that idea as much as possible in a fine-grained manner to give that to the LLM to have it start implementing. So what I did was have like a verbal brain dump into Claude. And the specific LLM that you use, doesn't matter as much. I have a subscription to all of these models, and I kind of use different models for different things. I think Claude is pretty good at coding. So here I wanted to design the high-level architecture for the code that would be built, and I decided to use Claude. So I started with the rough idea that I had. Told it I wanted to build this kind of AI analysis bot that would take in all of my messages and then give me some insights into it. So I did all of that, gave it some context, said I have an Android phone. I want to extract messages. I have a way to do that. Don't worry about extracting it. Just figure out how to read those messages in a certain format. So it took all of those requirements, and I also told it to give me an MVP, a minimum viable product that would be simple enough to build over the course of maybe a couple days, and not go too far into complex features. And
yeah, this is great.
So
when you say MVP, just for the listeners who don't know what a minimum viable product is,
I would just say that is
the smallest product that you can build that is still useful and solves a core issue that somebody has. So like basically, what's like the smallest unit of a product that you can build that people would still pay for and actually use?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's step one. Have a clear idea of what you're trying to build and articulate it in as much detail as possible. So it talked about the MVP. It talked about what the UI would look like, what platform it would be built for. This is currently a web app. It's in the browser, so you don't need to install anything. Just go to the website and it will work. It talked about how it would extract the messages. Currently, I just wanted to analyze the messages from my Android phone. It was able to do that. It talked about the message structure. Talked about how it would represent each message, then represent each contact and a different message thread. In practice, it didn't actually follow this. So somewhere along the way, this approach kind of fell apart. So it's helpful if you're very diligent about passing in as much of the context as possible.
Just to add a little bit of color to this, I think what you're mentioning here that I think is really important is just what data do you want to store, right? Because I think that after you come up with what you want to build, how we want to structure your data is actually one of the kind of like core questions to ask and have answered, right? So like because once you set the data that you have stored either in your database or whatever data store, it's oftentimes very challenging to modify that structure later. So you want to be very thoughtful on like what data you're collecting and then storing, and then everything that you build going forward is going to be based off of that original data shape, if you might think. Going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole field of data engineering that goes around trying to figure out how to represent your data, what schema it should be in your database, what would be the most efficient structure for a read-heavy application if you're just like reading a lot of data, social apps where you just read a feed of content, or a write-heavy application where you're like writing tons of data. Maybe think of it as I don't know, like the back end for YouTube, for example. You just need to store a bunch of stuff, or like the security camera application where you're not as much reading stuff. You're just like trying to store as much footage from your security camera as you can. Those are very important things to think about, and it'll definitely matter later on beyond the scope of an MVP. It actually generates code behind the scenes, so you can export the code. There's a little button that shows you what kind of code it was generated, and you can copy it, take it to your editor, and continue editing there. Or you can also export to Figma. But I think we disable that for certain versions of the LM that we use because it's still an early product. But yeah, you could export the code and take it and build it however you want. But I personally just like taking a screenshot of the designs because the implementation details might be a little bit different based on the kind of project that you're building. Stitch today builds a very simple HTML with Tailwind CSS as the styling component. So Tailwind is a popular framework to style websites, and it gives you easy names to style components. And this is pretty popular. So I think this would be a good thing to use. And
so if you want to use Tailwinds, it'd be like a way that you can make the text look a certain way. You can change certain colors or add some spacing and whatnot on the elements of your screen. So it's just like a standardized way of doing it where all the colors kind of match each other. So if you stick with Tailwind colors, your site's gonna look decent. I'm not gonna say it's look good, but like it's better than you just try to pick the colors manually. So it's just like a bunch of designers came together together, and they made a bunch of tools where everything kind of works nicely together, and it's easy to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
then I took all of this, all the requirements, all the designs, and I started building it. I used Cursor, and you can use any code editor that you like, or you can use some no-code tools. The popular ones are Lovable, Bolt, Replit is a good one. Google has Firebase Studios. Honestly, you have no limit of like the number of choices that are out there. Just use whatever you're familiar with. As a software engineer, Cursor, Windsurf, and some of these other IDEs, integrated development environment, give developers like me more freedom and more control over the code. So that's something that I prefer. Replit is a popular one that some of my students use to build applications without knowing how to code at all.
So these are tools that you can use to actually write the code. So before we were using these LLMs, right, to come up with the requirement documents, and we were using it to come up with the design. But now this is like a fully integrated text editor plus LLM where it can have context of your code. So as opposed to like what you could do hypothetically is you could go and then take your code and then paste it into ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT will respond. But then you actually have to go through the work of copying the code from ChatGPT, putting it into your text editor, saving it. If there's any bugs or like any error messages, you have to paste the error messages back. Just a bit of a time suck in a certain sense, because now you have to like go and figure out exactly what you want to write to ChatGPT. This just kind of does all that for you, right? So it can see, it can read multiple files at once. You can set up rules. It can see maybe it was output on the terminal. It might be able to take screenshots. And it's just like making the job of interacting with the AI a lot easier, all in one tool.
Yeah. So continuing with the development process, I started using Cursor, and looking at some of the analytics. I used I want to say about 150 edits, which generated about 40,000 lines of code, close to like 200 tab completions. And I don't know if this means anything to you, Mark. 40,000 lines of code. I went back to some of my other side projects. In the past, this would have taken me several weeks to like or like 2-3 months of work to implement, design, architect, brainstorm, and then ship. So this is like a medium, small to medium sized project. And all of this was vibe coded. Maybe like 90% vibe coded.
For sure, it really feels like you're cheating. And I want to mention one thing. For each edit, Shashank, you were using Git or some sort of version control, I assume, right?
Yes. That is an important thing to keep in mind, because you want to keep saving your progress. Think of it like playing a game. You do something, some things work, some things don't work. When something doesn't work, you want to revert and go back to a state that was working. So I used Git, and I committed frequently as I made small changes and pushed those changes. So I had another friend who was working on this with me, so he could try it out. And a lot of the times, the AI Cursor in my case, with whatever LLM behind the scenes that it was using, could not make sense of my request and made a mess. So in those instances, I had to revert to a previous checkpoint in Git to get to like a working state. Try again from scratch.
So I think that's really important. So for those that don't know what Git is, it is literally just a way to save your progress, as Shashank is saying. So to go on the video game example, like imagine you're playing a video game and you die. Well, then you're gonna reload your latest checkpoint, or maybe a previous checkpoint if you work
you
in
work
a good
in a
spot when
good
you die.
spot when you die.
Let's imagine
let's
you
imagine you
respawned,
respawned,
and then the moment you respawn, the enemy just chops off your head.
It's like,
right?
oh,
It's like,
oh,
maybe let's not do that
let's
checkpoint. Let's do the previous checkpoint. Git
Git is basically like checkpoints in a video game, but for code. And there's all kinds of like different terminology for Git. So it's kind of confusing. So like when Shashank says,
I'm
like I'm making a Git commit,
that's just like a
save,
save.
basically. It's like a checkpoint in time that you can go back to.
Git
push
is like another thing.
So oftentimes like
one thing that people worry about is their computer like being broken or catching on fire or something like that. What that means is like you can store your code on somebody else's computer. So the most popular way of storing the code is a website owned by Microsoft called GitHub, and it's just a place that you can store the files in your code that happens to know the Git protocol. So push means like I'm going to take the code that is on my computer, and I'm going to push it onto Microsoft servers so they can store it for me in case something happens to my computer, or I want to share with others, right? So like, let's say Shashank and I are working on a project. I want to share what I've worked with him. I'm going to push the code that's on my personal MacBook Pro, and I'm going to put it onto GitHub, and then Shashank can download the code from GitHub. So I don't know. Like it's kind of industry standard. Almost everybody uses it. There's a couple other alternatives, but don't worry about those. There's like Subversion, Mercurial. There's a couple other ones, but like the big one that everybody uses is Git. So if you're gonna do any software development, vibe coding, learn the basics of Git. Like learn Git add, Git commit, Git push, Git status, just some of these things, and your life is gonna be a lot easier. Bit of a learning curve. I admit it is a little bit challenging to learn the basics of Git, but if you watch like an hour course or something like that, you can be pretty competent with it in a short period of time.
But honestly, you can get started even without having a good understanding of how Git works, because at any step of the flow, you can just ask the LLM, the coding agent, or whatever LLM that you have access to, how to use Git. And oftentimes, the vibe coding tools will have the ability to run terminal commands for you, and they can actually do all of this for you without you having explicit knowledge of any Git command. Cursor, for example, is able to run commands in your terminal, so it is able to save progress, able to push changes to a single repository, which can then be shared with someone else who can continue looking at the changes and making contributions on their end. It's also able to run your code, test it, debug it, see if there's any issues, and then fix it automatically. So it definitely helps if you have an understanding of how these things work. But honestly, for a short weekend project, it's fine if you just go based on the vibes and have no clue how these things work internally.
Absolutely, because if the project is small enough, if these things work really well, and they need very little handholding, and typically they can solve the problems by themselves. As the project gets bigger, a lot of this starts to break down, and oftentimes you get more errors, and you have to be a little bit more careful about how you write the prompts. But if the project is small, like a few hundred lines of code, even a few thousand lines of code, like these LLMs can handle it no problem. You can just type away and just let the vibes take you away.
So here's a really good course on vibe coding with Replit, and they partnered with deeplearning.ai, which is Andrew Ng's website, to build a beginner course, which is about an hour and a half. Search for vibe coding 101 with Replit to our audio listeners. And it's a free course. It's a free course. Goes through all of the basics of vibe coding and best practices. It's like a field that's existed for maybe 2 months, but we have best practices based on all the learnings that people have, and trial and error that we've all done to give you the best way to succeed with vibe coding. Some of the high level fundamentals of this process is start with the thinking, which is what we did in the ideation phase. Figure out what frameworks you want to use. We talked about Tailwind, but this is kind of a tricky point because I like to lean on the LLM to tell me what frameworks it's most comfortable using based on the problem that we're trying to solve. Because if you think about what these LLMs are good at, they're good at data that they've been trained on. So most likely they'll be good at working with popular frameworks and popular tools, because there'll be a lot of examples of these things online on Stack Overflow, which is like a popular question answer website for developers. There'll be a lot of documentation. There'll be a lot of tutorials that explain how to do this. A really popular YouTuber who posts videos about coding, front end, Fireship. He always tries to use these LLMs to see if they can write svelte code and svelte runes, which is like a modern language with great performance and good design. But like it's pretty new and very esoteric, and no one really uses it. And these LLMs struggle a lot. So picking the right frameworks is an important decision. If you're trying to vibe code and use LLMs to do all the work for you, I would highly recommend using popular frameworks, or just asking the LLM what kind of frameworks it thinks it should use, and then maintaining some consistency throughout the app. And then the next principle is checkpoints. We talked about using GitHub to save your progress, because oftentimes these LLMs will go off the rails and do all sorts of changes. You'll ask a coding agent to make a specific edit, and then it'll go somewhere else and change a random part of the code base that has no relation to the functionality you're working on. So that is super annoying. It's really challenging to keep track of all that if you don't have version control, Git, for example.
Two things. With Cursor, it should be possible to just tell it what files you want to work on. So, like, if you are familiar with the code that you're working on, and you know that whatever change you're going to do is going to be isolated to a couple files. And also, as a side point, if you are vibe coding, do your best to have the LLM break things down into logical chunks where each file does something. Typically like one thing, only like maybe one file will be like one UI page, or like one file to one data structure. But basically, like you want to make it so that you don't have the entire code base be like a million lines, because that's gonna be too hard. Because that's gonna be too hard to work with. It's much easier to say like, hey, LLM, like work on these 4 files, and then just make the changes within them, as opposed to like say, hey, here's the file with like a billion lines, and just good luck, because it's gonna
so I think what you're talking about is modularity. That's something that software developers keep building production. You don't want to just write all of Facebook in a single line, a single file, push it to a website and have people use that single line of code, a single file of code. So try to break things up into logical groupings by functionality, by feature, by visual design. So it can be separated. The LLM can work on specific things in isolation without affecting too many other things.
Yes. Actually, the other thing I want to ask you about is, did you have any tests for your code? Did you use any unit tests or anything like that?
That is a really good question. I tried writing some tests before I tried a major chunk of refactoring, but there's a really good video from YC, which talks to a bunch of startup founders about how they vibe code. And there's a video titled "How to Get the Most Out of Vibe Coding." And one of the founders talks specifically about test-driven development. They start with a test. They write the test even before writing a single piece of functional code, because then they have a very clear metric of what success looks like, and then the LLM can just keep writing code until the test pass, and then boom, you have a way for the LLM to self-evaluate its results and keep making progress.
So just to explain what tests are real quick, in case you haven't written any software before. A test, just like
code that runs your code and then make sure it does what you want. So, for example, let's say you are building Shashank's app, right? And so what you might do is you might write some code that like clicks around on every single page, and then just make sure that the page loads and doesn't throw any errors. That would be like a very basic test. Or like another test you could do is just like open the web page and then make sure it doesn't crash. That would be like another test you could do. So then you know if you ran this, and then after you made some code changes, and then if you open the web page and everything crashes, then it's like, well, obviously something is broken and you need to fix it. So this helps you avoid regression. So like if as your project gets bigger, oftentimes very easy to break something else, and oftentimes you may not know that you broke that thing unless you click through the whole app and use all the little features. So having tests to help you run the code automatically is going to make sure that you don't accidentally break things going forward.
For another good reason why testing is important. Every once in a while, you want to refactor your code base because things might stop making sense, not be feasible to continue developing the same way you've been doing. If you hit a certain roadblock, and you might need to refactor the entire code base. In my example, there was no distinction between the concept of a contact and a chat thread. So this app that I coded the first weekend, it correlated an entire conversation with a single contact. So group messages were treated as if I was talking to a single contact, and I just could not vibe code myself out of this. So I had to refactor a little bit. Refactor meant change the entire architecture of the app to accommodate for a different design thinking. I was very worried about any kind of refactor because if I made drastic changes with LLMs, there would be no guarantee that anything would work the same after the refactor. Then I started writing tests to make sure after the LLM making a bunch of sweeping changes, multiple files affecting the entire project, it would still function relatively well.
This just kind of comes back full circle to what we talked about at the beginning. Is why data structures and how you store the data is super important because if you don't count for, let's say, group messages at the beginning, now you have to change. It's like, well, now you have to change literally every single thing in your code in order to account for that. So, like, ideally, once you have your data structure set, like, you shouldn't be changing it too often because whenever you change it, it's almost always a massive headache.
Speaking of headaches, I think the next point that I wanted to talk about is debugging. I kind of got a brief overview of my cursor chat history. I mentioned that I had about 150 conversations with cursor to make usually when I was working on a different feature, a different change, I would start a new conversation. And I broke all those conversations into categories. And I found that roughly one third of those were features, a little more than one third, and a little less than one third were bug fixes. So almost a third of the time, I was fixing the bugs that the LLM was creating, or that I discovered. So this third of the time, I needed ways to figure out how do I debug? How do I root cause the issues that I'm seeing? If the app is not loading, or if the chats that I'm looking at don't appear, if it's not parsing the messages, or it just crashes. How do I make sense of this? There's a lot of different ways that you can make sense of this. Testing definitely helps. The tests are failing. That catches the error before it even reaches your user. The error reaches your user. I think your best friend is trying to figure out what the software is doing. It's really easy if you have a bunch of logging in place, which is messages that convey what different pieces of the code do. So I added a bunch of logging to this part parses all the messages. I added how many messages are being parsed. I added notifications for like messages when it detects group chats. I added messages for each individual contact that was added,
and any action that the user
took
in my
user interface. So
clicked any
if
kind of
they
AI feature,
clicked any kind of AI feature, I logged that. If they wanted to view any of the statistics, I logged like a high level view of the statistics. So then anytime I encountered a bug, I was able to look through the entire log transcript to see in sequence how my software went about trying to expose this feature and then continue root causing the issue.
Yeah, it's very useful. So another thing is it's helpful if you have an issue to just simply ask the LLM what the problem is. Sometimes you're gonna have to go in and like debug the code, look at the logs, do a lot of analysis and try to figure out what's going on. And sometimes for really subtle things, that might be what you have to do. Not fun, but not fun. Oftentimes, what you can do is paste in the error message, send it to the LLM, or have your cursor just see the error messages and then just make another change for you. And if you have good tests and good requirement document, like odds are it's just gonna work afterwards. And most of the time, like when you do that bug fix fairly quickly.
That's actually an amazing point. That's actually an amazing point. I completely forgot about that because I have I think like a YOLO feature, something turned on in Cursor where it behaves like an
coding agent,
and doesn't even ask me when there's build error. So oftentimes when you like have a piece of software, you have to build it and then run it. So during the build step, there's a bunch of errors when a certain library isn't found, certain variable is not named correctly, and it'll be surfaced in the terminal. Cursor is able to then look at that error in the terminal. If it's not, you can just copy
and then it's able to like
debug itself, figure out what the error is,
all by
and then fix it all by
run
itself.
it again, build it again,
run it again, build it again, run it again, and then
load it in
my browser, and then let me know if it works or not. It's just incredible how far these LLMs have come. Speaking of LLMs, what LLM are you using in Cursor right now? You know, that's a good question. I really wanted to embrace this
culture of vibe coding,
and I just wanted to go off the vibes. I clicked auto because
it
all of the routing for me. That's the whole reason OpenAI made ChatGPT 5 because it abstracts this decision that users have to make to pick which model that they want. I used
specific models,
but then I found myself
getting stuck,
like maybe for
10,
15
seconds thinking, okay,
20 seconds thinking, okay, like how complex is this task? Which model should I use? I've used like too many max modes already. I've used too many Sonnet 4 calls. Maybe I should like go down to a lower model. I don't think I'm getting significant benefits relative to how much friction this is creating. So I just clicked the auto mode the entire time. How much did it cost you?
I know you're using Cursor and you're using these APIs. People want to know. How much money did you spend? How much money did you spend?
Great question. I looked at the billing dashboard in my Cursor account, and it cost about $18 to
vibe code
this over 3 weekends, I want to say. The first 2 weekends was getting it to a working state, and I spent the other third weekend just polishing, adding some SEO,
and making some minor edits. So
it
it was about $18
to get a MVP of like a
AI Insights
app for your messages.
This is similar to what I've seen
from other people. One of my students from the AI coaching course was really clever. He just bounced around from one editor to another. He picked Lovables to start with because it was the easiest to get up and running. He had never programmed in the past. So he started with Lovable. He then
exported all the code to GitHub,
pulled it, and started using Cursor a little bit, then ran into some rate limits with Cursor, and then decided to use Cray, which is another coding agent. I think it's from one of the Chinese companies. I want to say Alibaba. But they have a fantastic intro plan, $3 for the first month. Though in his final presentation, he built a fairly complex app. I think it's a little more complex than the app that I built. I'm just making a random guess here. It might have taken maybe 50,000 lines of code,
and it cost him $3.
And it cost him $3.
But it might have been more in credits.
It might have been more in credits. VC funded credits.
That is incredible.
I will say that that's the thing that you need to be careful about with a lot of this vibe coding, because as your project gets bigger, it's very easy to spend money incredibly quickly. So I remember I'm working on a and it's a little bit project, and it's a little bit bigger than what you're working on right now. And I think just to scan through the code base, just to look at the files, I think it cost me like 50 cents or something like that. Just to look at it, and I was like, oh. Yeah, this is. And then after it scanned it, it was like, oh, too much context, and then it made a bunch of really ridiculous edits that I had to undo. So scanned it again, and then I got no working code whatsoever, and I spent $1.
Gosh, this is scary.
Gosh, this is scary, because I got to be really careful what we do. So
I think as your project gets bigger, it's really important on how you actually focus on exactly what to send to the LLM. So in Cursor, you can go and specify exactly what files you want to add, and almost all of these types of tools will allow you to use a subsection of your code. And then I think that in my opinion, these tools start to break down a little bit, just because you might be spending. I found myself I'm working on my larger project. I felt myself spending a lot of time just trying to tweak the exact context I was sending to get a workable response. So that means I actually don't use as much. I've really tried. I just feel like for me, I spend a lot of time fighting with the tool. Still, just go in, enter the files that I want, and then I just have some boilerplate instructions, like a product requirement document that I just paste it at the end, and I just pass that to the LM, and I send it to Grok or whatever, and it gives them the response. I really want to use Cursor or some of these other tools. I feel like they slow me down. I feel like they slow me down. Actually, I'm gonna try again. I don't know. I'm gonna try again.
Try it again. Try it again. I personally really like using that. I just like the seamless flow. I don't think copy pasting is the best UX, and I think if you do that repeatedly, I think it is slowing you down. I think it is slowing you down to some extent. Cognitive load of figuring out what to copy, switching files. I think the benefit of vibe coding is just you can go so fast. But again, iterate and brainstorm. But again, I was working with a weekend project where I didn't care about the scalability of this code. So yeah, you're right. I think you do need to be I think you do need to be careful as your project scales. But one thing that does help as your project scales is documentation. I mentioned that. So I mentioned that a little more than a third of the time I was building the features with these Cursor LM calls. A little less than third of the time. Another 15% of the time. I was working on docs. I was working on docs. I was asking the LLM to analyze all the files that it's worked on. Give me a summary of this entire document tree under this folder for this specific feature, and summarize it and create a readme of how this thing works, create a readme of how this other feature works, and then combine all that together to create like an overall readme for this entire project. As I was building other features, I constantly referenced the readmes, figuring out which files to use as context was proving too unwieldy. So the readmes contain an overview of a lot of different pieces of the code, and that was like one manual way for me to compress the context of the entire code base into manageable sizes, and then even use that for myself as reference when I wanted to understand how
I could read that
this piece
myself,
is
have a good
working. Could read that
understanding,
myself,
and
have
then
a good
again pass that into
understanding,
the
and then
LLM
again pass that into the LLM when I
debug a
wanted
certain
to
task.
debug a certain task.
I would actually encourage our listeners that using the LLM to write your documentation may not necessarily be the best idea because the LLM is going to oftentimes write a lot of things that you may not want. So I personally think that if you spent 50% of your time, like I might spend 30% of my time actually writing the documentation, just really thinking through what I want to build. Like, what's this final product? I mean, if you're just trying to vibe something up and you don't really care about like the final product, like it's fine. Don't spend much time on this. But like, if you actually want to build something good, like I think spending a lot of time with the documentation is going to pay for itself in spades. If you can have like really solid documentation, you think through all the edge cases, and you just explain in extreme detail how you want your program to work, because that's going to really help avoid regressions going forward. 15% of the time, I don't know, 15% of the time, I feel like that actually is almost a little low. I wouldn't mind spending like more time, like really focusing on
if you're not going to do the coding,
like if you're not going to do the coding, you might as well be figuring out exactly
maybe
what
just
you want to build.
maybe just to
contextualize.
contextualize.
I spent a lot of time thinking before I even started coding.
So this doesn't include all of the artifacts that I created, all of the product requirement documents,
architecture designs that
I created, even before I went to Cursor. That might have added another 10-20%
list of
the
LLM
entire
calls where
list of LLM calls where I was thinking through the architecture, thinking through the product requirements, what to build, how to build it, what kind of tools to use,
and doing some deep research calls,
and doing some deep research calls to search the web
examples
for
of how people solve this
examples
problem,
of how people solve this problem, to get
So
inspiration, to get ideas. So definitely do as much research as possible
to create a concrete idea
of what you're trying to build.
And your documentation, I think we've kind of glossed over it. I think we've kind of glossed over it. Is that all in just one file, or do you have many files for the documentation? And also, the follow-up question is like, assuming I see you like shaking your head about like it being multiple files, like how do you make sure that Cursor looks at the appropriate file of documentation?
The last part I'm not sure.
The last part I'm not sure, but in the spirit of trying to vibe code, I just asked it to create a README file in every single directory. I think that's a little redundant. I don't think that's the best way to do it. I was building a production grade application. I think that'll be too much and too verbose. But for the sake of vibe coding something, because like I honestly didn't care how the code worked. I just wanted Cursor to handle this and keep track of what was going on. So I asked it to create README files in every single directory.
Every higher level directory
that contained other subdirectories, it would be a higher level of abstraction, which would reference the readmes in the subdirectories. And at the very top level, it would only think about the project on a very high level, how to run it, how to build it, and how to deploy it. And when I was working on certain problems, if it was in a certain folder, I would just search for the README in that folder and then pass that in. If it wasn't able to solve the problem the first try.
One of these most popular ones is Heroku. So these are all
awesome.
We talked about using the LLM
to
taking
deploy
this a little further.
And taking this a little further, I asked it to
buying the domain,
to create like a public-facing
website for people to access.
A website for people to access,
and help me configure the CNS,
and help me configure the CNS,
the CNAME,
the DNS, the CNAME,
and
the DNS, and a bunch of other
help
configs that help route the domain name that I bought to the GitHub pages hosting that I was using.
So basically what that means is like configuration where if you go to like something, like if I go to your website convochat.io, convochat.io is just the domain name. You need to point that domain name to a particular computer. In this case, it's like one of Microsoft's computers running the data set. So like all these configurations just point that domain name to a computer somewhere else.
So now we've gone through the entire process.
Now we've gone through the entire process of ideating, designing,
building and deploying an application.
One last thing
One last thing related to the coding part is SEO. So once you've deployed something, you need users. Unless you have a massive audience already, you need to figure out how to have the audience come to you. So SEO is a
common way to do
a
this.
common way to do this. And the best way you can do this is by generating a lot of content. Generating a lot of content that the search engines, mostly Google, can index, and then surface that anytime anyone searches for something related to what you're doing.
To be clear, not just a lot, but a lot of good content, a lot of relevant content. Google wants to only show the best results for when you type in something, right? So, for example, if I was searching like, how do I analyze my text messages?
Shashank had
And
an article or something like
Shashank
that,
had an article
talking about how you would analyze text messages, and he gave his tool as an example. That might be something that could rank very highly in Google, right? But you don't want to just like have a file that goes and just says like analyze messages, analyze messages, analyze messages 10 million times, right? Like Google would downrate that because that would be spam, right? You want to have something that like people find useful. I think like back in the day,
I think like back in the day, one of the most common ways is like who else links to this, right? So like
it was called like PageRank, I think.
It
Wasn't
was
it
called
from like Larry
PageRank,
Page?
I think. Wasn't it
Where
from like Larry
they
Page?
would say like,
where they would
what
say like, hey,
pages are linked
what
to other
pages
So for
are
example,
linked
a lot
to
of
other
people
pages? So for example, a
will
lot of
send
people
links
will
around to the New York
send
Times.
links
And then
around
since a
to
lot
the
of
New York
people are
Times,
referencing
and then
the
since
New
a
York
lot of people are referencing the New York Times, New York Times gets a lot of
social or
I guess
internet
like
clout,
social or internet
Google would say,
clout,
oh,
and
lots
then
of people are
Google would say,
connected to
oh,
that,
lots
therefore
of
it
people
must
are
be
connected to
popular.
that, therefore it
like
must
we're
be
gonna rank that
popular.
higher.
Therefore,
Like
like
if
we're
the
gonna rank
New
that
York
higher. And
Times
like if
had
the
something about
New York
analyzing
Times
text
had
messages,
something about
that might
analyzing
be
text
like the
messages,
number one
that
result
might
on
be
Google, just
like the
because
number
it's
one
like a
result
very
on Google, just
relevant
because
thing from
it's like a
very
very
trusted source.
relevant
And
thing.
again,
from a
this
very
is
trusted
something
source.
that
And
the
again,
LLMs
this is
excel at,
something that the
because all you're
LLMs excel at,
generating is a lot
because
of
all you're
text. So for
generating
each
is a lot of text. So for
sub-feature that I
each
had,
sub-feature
this website that I made can analyze
this
messages
website
from
that I made can
WhatsApp,
analyze
Telegram,
messages from WhatsApp,
Facebook
Telegram,
Messenger, Android
Facebook
SMS
Messenger,
backups. So for
Android
each
SMS
one of these
backups.
features,
So
I
for
created a
each one of
separate
these features,
blog
I
post
created a separate
that had
blog
in-depth
post
instructions
that
about how
had
to upload
in-depth
your messages,
instructions about
how
how
to
to upload
analyze
your
them,
messages,
what kind of
how
insights
to
that you would
analyze them,
get,
what kind of insights that you would
and
get,
everything in detail about
and
how
everything in
this
detail
would be
about
useful to
how
someone
this would
searching
be
for
useful
this
to
kind of a
someone
feature.
searching for this kind of a
Then
feature.
I put up all
Then
those
I
websites on a
put up all those
public
websites on a public
directory, which would be indexed by Google
directory,
search,
which would
and
be
I
indexed by Google
continued
search.
asking the
And I
LLM how to
continued
make
asking the
this
LLM how to
more
make
SEO
this
optimized. It gave me a lot
more
of
SEO
instructions about
optimized.
how to
It
use
gave me a lot
Google
of
Search
instructions
Console,
about how to use
which is
Google
a
Search
useful tool if
Console,
you have your own
which is a
website,
useful tool if
to
you have your own
go
website,
inspect
to
your own
go
domain,
inspect
see if it's being
your own
indexed,
domain, see if it's being
upload a
indexed,
sitemap, which is another
upload a
useful
sitemap, which is another useful
table of contents for the
table
Google
of
search
contents
engine to reference
for the Google
when
search
it's
engine to reference
crawling your
when
website to
it's
see all the
crawling your
different
website
pages
to
that your
see
website
all the
contains.
different pages that your website contains.
Upload a
Um,
logo,
upload a
and
logo,
set a meaningful
and
title,
set a
subtitle, and a
meaningful
description for
title,
each of those
subtitle,
pages.
and a
So
description for
this
each of those pages.
entire use
So
case of
this
SEO
entire
optimization
use case of SEO
was something that I
optimization
spent another
was something that I
15%
spent
of the
another
LLM calls in Cursor
15% of
to
the
try
LLM
to
calls in
optimize
Cursor
and
to
guide
try
me
to
through this
optimize
entire
and
process.
guide me
Yes,
through this entire
I think
process.
SEO
Yes,
optimization
I think
is really
SEO
important.
optimization is really
We're even
important,
going
and
to see
I think in the
people trying to
future we're even going to
optimize their
see people
code
trying to
to be
optimize
able to
their code
easily
to
read
be
by
able
the
to
LLMs,
be
because I
easily
think
read by
maybe
the
in the future
LLMs. Because
people
I
will be
think
using
maybe
search
in the
engines
future
less
people will
and
be
these
using search
LLMs
engines less
more
and
and more
less,
for
and
getting
these
the answers.
LLMs more and
If
more for getting
your
the answers. If
website
your
can
website
be
can
returned in a ChatGPT
be
result,
returned in a
that is going to
ChatGPT
be
result, that is going to
maybe the
be
future. So basically,
maybe
what
the
you want to
future.
do is you
So
want to make
basically,
sure
what you want
that
to
your
do is you
code
want to
is
make sure that
easily
your code is
understood
easily
by whatever is reading
understood
it, because
by
that
whatever is reading it, because that
Awesome. So
Awesome.
one final thing was
one final
after
thing
all of this
was
how
after
do
all of
you
this, how do you
brand your product? You created something
brand
that works.
your product?
You
You
know,
created
it's something
something that
you
works.
share this link with a friend.
You can
but
share
you
this
kinda
link with
wanna
a
make it
friend,
enticing.
but you kind of want to make it enticing. You want to create
one
some kind
final
of
thing
branding.
was to
So
slap a logo
one
on it.
final
And
thing was
I
to slap a
had,
logo on it,
an
and
entire
I
working app
had
that
an
had a bunch
entire
of
working app
functionality,
that had a bunch of functionality,
that had
UX
UX that I could take screenshots of
that I could take screenshots of and then pass it into an LLM. For this, I used ChatGPT to brainstorm a bunch of ideas. So I gave it the entire description of what my app does, and I asked it to create a bunch of designs for an app icon. So it gave me about 6 different ideas, a chat bubble with like a neural network, a message with a spark icon, a brain with text lines. Sifted through some of these ideas, picked 2 of them, which I liked, and I asked it to continue fleshing out the details of these 2 different ideas that I liked, and then it gave me in-depth descriptions of what this should look like. It gave me the shape, it gave me like the accent thing that it wanted to do. It gave me a color palette with very in-depth detail, a gradient or a simple dual tone using blue, representing communication and technology, with a transition to vibrant yellow or orange, symbolizing insight and clarity. Expanded upon the style, to say that let's make it modern, clean, bold outlines. Another one similarly had about a paragraph worth of text that outlined the shape, illumination, colors, style. And then I took both of these. Using ChatGPT. I was using ChatGPT because the GPT-4o image generator was by far the best at maintaining coherent, consistent changes across images. So honestly, first try, it nailed it. Gave me an amazing icon with like a little star that was glowing. And someone even commented how they loved the icon when I shared this on Product Hunt. Just as a backup, I made another one. Didn't like it as much, but it was helpful to iterate so quickly because, all it took was an LLM call. All it took was an LLM call. Now, I think I would recommend anyone listening to try the Nano Banana, Google's image generation model. This is just like an internal name, I think. Again, this is just like an internal name, I think, but you can use it in the default ask it to generate an image, model, ask it to generate an image, make some changes, slap on a different color, make it bigger or smaller, whatever else you want. It'll be very consistent in the changes that it makes. And it won't just like willy-nilly change the whole image and change the entire character and scene as it used to maybe a few days ago or a few months ago.
Yeah, I think this is really helpful. Is there anything you use the AI to help you when you launched it to Product Hunt, or did you just use what you already had?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that's a good question. I don't think I used too much, but I probably should have. Too much, but I probably should have. I think the description is something that I could have optimized. I asked it to generate the logo and the brand name. The brand name Convo was a name that I brainstormed. So apart from the app icon, I needed to pick a domain name. So I again dumped all the information about the app, all the features and functionality that it had, and asked it to help me brainstorm a bunch of domain name ideas. And this was one of the ones that was available, and it sounded good to me. So I went ahead and bought the domain name. I went ahead and bought the domain name.
I feel like I've learned a lot. I love it. I feel like I've learned a lot through this conversation, and this really gives me a lot of motivation for trying some things going forward in vibe coding. And I encourage the listener, give it a try. Even if you have no programming experience, you might be surprised with how much you're able to create, because these tools are really powerful. And they're just fantastic. So
I
highly recommend it.
agree. I absolutely agree. Having worked at several startups, and also now, despite working at Google, my product feels very much like a startup where we're very scrappy, move quickly, and have very little overhead. This era is just radically different from what it used to be like building a startup. I think any of these apps that you can build today in a day would take engineers weeks, if not months, just a few years ago. So you have very little friction. And hopefully you learned a couple ways. Hopefully you learned using these tools. A couple ways of build these tools to build, ideate, deploy, and make it look pretty.
I think we're back
now. We're back now. Yeah, I think we're done listening. We'll catch you again next time.